It looks like we have a new incoming administration. What does that mean for the 5G industry, the infrastructure of it all, like yourselves?
Look, Bonnie, the good news is nobody has to vote on 5G. It's not red, it's not blue. Thankfully, it sits down the middle in purple. 5G is going to be a tremendous catalyst for our economy. We're very excited about it. First and foremost, it's a significant amount of investment. There'll be $1.1 trillion, Bonnie, invested in 5G infrastructure over the next 5 years. So we're gearing up for that across our entire ecosystem at Colony Capital because it's an incredibly heavy lift to deliver the promise of the network so that it matches up with the phone's capabilities.
That said, the likes of Verizon and AT&T, they are not upping their expenditure when it comes to 5G infrastructure. Will they at some point, or have we missed the big spend?
No, they absolutely will. I think if you listen carefully to what Stanky and what Hans has said, you know, they're obviously building a lot of core fiber infrastructure, Bonnie, to support the infrastructure and the amount of demand that's coming. See, what's so interesting about 5G from my perspective as a builder and developer of infrastructure is 4G was about delivering the promise of device connectivity and device productivity for the consumer. What a lot of people aren't looking at yet in 5G is how it impacts the enterprise. And so when we think about what's happening in 5G, it's not only connecting consumers and delivering lower latency solutions, better battery life, and more performance, but you have to begin to think about how 5G spectrum and 5G applications can help big corporations, help supply chain, and most importantly, increase productivity in this country. This is where we can really gain a comparative advantage in the United States, is by seeing that we deploy this technology in new use cases. And I think from a T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T perspective, the opportunity to grow ARPU in a more business-facing enterprise environment is something that holds a lot of promise for them.
What about under a Biden administration, though, Marc? I know you sit on one of the FCC boards. What does regulation look like, you know, next year, assuming that all goes according to, you know, how it looks like it's going to go now?
Sure. I mean, if we turn the clock back, Bonnie, over 4, 5, 6 years ago during the Obama administration, I think you found a very constructive tone and tenor from the FCC that was about pushing enterprise forward, pushing innovation forward. And I think the Biden administration will follow that path as well. You know, the current sitting commissioner, Ajit Pai, was obviously put in place in the Obama administration. President Trump kept him, which only signals how neutral the FCC is. And everything and all the hard work that the volunteers that are doing at the FCC right now are focused on that. You know, the key trends are, one, how do we get broadband deployment out into rural areas? How do we bridge that digital divide? How do we connect all Americans, not just the big cities? And then secondly, how do we get CBRS spectrum cleared? How do we get that 5G spectrum into the hands of the carriers so that we can start building those networks and we can deploy that 1.1 trillion of CapEx that is so necessary to take this technology forward?
You know, Marc, you've been unloading legacy assets, including things like hotels and so on, in order to complete the transition to the new colony, if you like. How has it been unloading these assets at a time when they're definitely lower bid, let's say? And is there any rush on unloading these? Could you hold on to them for a while?
Well, look, it's really interesting you should say that. We had a great quarter this past quarter. We sold our lodging portfolio for $2.9 billion, and we acquired zColo, an edge computing business, for $1.4 billion. So there's another $4.3 billion in asset rotation at Colony, which is what we promised investors. I think as the trajectory of selling traditional real estate, we're being very thoughtful about that. We've got really 3 sleeves left in our traditional real estate, Bonnie. One of them is actually wellness infrastructure. So we've got 400 medical properties that serve our seniors, skilled nursing facilities, medical office buildings. That portfolio, you'd be well surprised to know, has performed incredibly well during the pandemic. So we actually have a very positive outlook on wellness infrastructure. I think our mortgage REIT, CLNC, which trades independently, has performed well in the recent weeks as we're starting to see great recovery in that business. And then our traditional real estate portfolio, we've been averaging about 150 million of traditional asset sales every quarter. We're predicting another 170 to 300 million of dispositions in the fourth quarter. And so all of this leads to asset rotation in our performance. We delivered 89% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth in our digital segment. That's tremendous growth. So we're being thoughtful, we're being prudent, we're rotating the asset base, and in turn, we're rotating our revenues, which should excite investors.
Mark, what's the capital expenditure right now for you on, infrastructure, but not just obviously, physical infrastructure and 5G infrastructure and so on, but also digital infrastructure, the cloud and so on, where a lot is moving at the moment?
Sure. So this year, our marketplace, if you think about the total addressable market, there is about $378 billion of CapEx is being spent in digital infrastructure globally right now, Vonnie. One of those big trends is cloud and cloud computing. So I think as you think about where compute applications are happening and how we can get those applications closer to you and closer to your home, we invested heavily in edge computing in the past quarter. And so when we think about 5G and delivering a low latency solution, the only way you do that, Vonnie, is by putting the actual radios close to the applications. And this is the essence of edge computing. So we're anticipating investing at least another $1 billion into edge computing. We've got a significant amount of new opportunities coming. We've just started proliferating edge computing in the United States. We now have our attention on Europe, and we're looking at Asia as well. We think those are two markets that are going to desire a lot of edge computing. And to do that, we've got to continue to put more facilities closer to consumers and closer to enterprises.
And how do you fit in with the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world when it comes to those particular assets?
Well, it's really interesting you say that. I mean, these have been customers of mine for 26 years, and we've been building infrastructure for them for multiple decades. And I think this iteration for AT&T and Verizon is the most exciting. In our small cell infrastructure business, Extenet Systems in Chicago, we've been building small cell infrastructure and radio access hubs for them. These are called C-RAN or Open RAN hubs. And what's exciting inside these new radio hubs in this Open RAN architecture, Vonnie, is you're beginning to see Verizon and AT&T put applications adjacent to those radios. So if you think about what Verizon's doing in their Open RAN architecture and partnering with Amazon, they're able to bring the entire AWS cloud experience right to your device a lot quicker. Same thing with AT&T and partnering with Azure. We're beginning to see some of that Microsoft equipment run adjacent to that. So from a leasing perspective and from an organic cash flow perspective for Colony, it's tremendous because it's adding more equipment to our existing infrastructure, which of course in turn leads to increased revenues and hopefully more AFFO for our investors.
Real quick, Mark, it seems like it's a crowded trade right now. I mean, you have a lot of competitors and, they're pretty interchangeable, all these assets, except for potentially location and so on. Are they being bid up right now, and how are you faring?
I think we're faring quite well. We've deployed about $20 billion in CapEx this year heretofore. We've got 5 transactions we'll be closing in the fourth quarter in digital, Vonnie. We'll deploy at least another $1 billion of equity in the fourth quarter, probably couple that with another $1 billion of debt. So our buying program this year in digital will be about $22 billion. That's a pretty radical transformation for Colony. Yes, it's a competitive environment out there, but look, as I said earlier, these are long-lived relationships for us. Most of the folks that are buying infrastructure assets are new kids on the block. We've kind of been around the block a few times. So these customer relationships and staying close to AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, any way that we can help them deploy network, they know we're a trusted partner, and Colony's been there for them for the last 3 decades.